Officer Marcus Bennett's hand cut through the air with terrifying speed, the sharp crack of impact against the teenage girl's face echoing through the convenience store. Surveillance cameras captured everything. The brutal slap, the girl crumpling to the floor, blood trickling from her lip. But what those cameras revealed in the next 60 seconds would transform this decorated police officer's life into a living nightmare, and expose a truth so devastating that an entire city would erupt in chaos. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. The summer heat in Oakland hung thick and oppressive on the night of August 15th, the kind of heat that made tempers flare and patience evaporate like water on scorching concrete. Johnson's Corner Store sat on the intersection of 47th and Grove Street, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across shelves stocked with chips, sodas, and the everyday necessities that kept a working-class neighborhood alive. The store had been a fixture in the community for nearly 15 years, ever since Robert Johnson had poured his life savings into turning a dilapidated building into a beacon of hope for a neighborhood that had seen too much darkness. But Robert Johnson was dead now, gunned down in a supposed robbery gone wrong 18 months ago, his murder officially classified as unsolved, despite the whispers that echoed through the community like a Greek chorus of suspicion and rage. His daughter, Maya Johnson, had inherited more than just the store. She'd inherited his dreams, his debts, and the heavy mantle of being a 15-year-old trying to hold together what her father had built while navigating the treacherous waters of grief. Officer Marcus Bennett had been patrolling the Grove Street corridor for 12 years, long enough to know every crack in the sidewalk, every face behind every counter, every teenager who thought they were invisible when they pocketed candy bars, or spray-painted their tags on brick walls weathered by time and neglect. He was 42 years old, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of too many late nights and too many things seen that couldn't be unseen. His reputation in the department was solid, community-oriented, fair, the kind of cop who'd give a kid a warning instead of a criminal record, who knew that sometimes a firm word was worth more than handcuffs. But everyone has a breaking point, and Marcus Bennett reached his at exactly 9:47 p.m. on that sweltering August night. He'd entered Johnson's Corner Store in response to a call about a disturbance, teenagers causing trouble, possibly shoplifting, the usual Friday night chaos that came with summer heat and boredom. The store was crowded with the after-dinner rush, mothers buying milk, old men grabbing lottery tickets, teenagers clustering around the chip aisle like moths to flame. Maya Johnson stood behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, exhaustion etched into features too young to carry such weariness. Marcus recognized her immediately. He'd attended Robert Johnson's funeral, had watched this bright-eyed girl crumble as they lowered her father into the ground. He'd even stopped by the store a few times in the months after, checking in, making sure she was okay, playing the role of community guardian that he'd always believed defined good policing. "Evening, Maya," Marcus said as he entered, his hand instinctively resting on his belt near his radio. "Got a call about some trouble." Maya's eyes flickered with something Marcus couldn't quite read. Was it fear, anger, recognition? Just some kids being loud, Officer Bennett, nothing I can't handle. But Marcus saw them, 3 teenagers near the back, their body language aggressive, their voices rising above the hum of the refrigerator units. One of them, a kid Marcus recognized as Devin Price, a 16-year-old with a juvenile record as long as his arm, was gesturing wildly at Maya, his face contorted with anger. "You think you're better than us now, Maya, running your daddy's store like you own the world." Devin's voice carried across the store, drawing the attention of every customer. "Your daddy was a snitch and everybody knows it, probably why he got what he deserved." The temperature in the store seemed to drop 20 degrees despite the oppressive heat outside. Customers froze, their hands hovering over products, their eyes darting between Maya, Devin, and Officer Bennett. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gun that had already been fired. Maya's face transformed from weary resignation to pure fury in the span of a heartbeat. "Get out of my store," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Get out now before I call the police. Oh wait, they're already here." Devin laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with cruelty. "Your daddy thought he could play both sides, thought he could inform on the neighborhood and still be respected. Where'd that get him? 6 feet under." Marcus moved forward, his training kicking in, his voice carrying the authority of a dozen years on the force. "Devin, that's enough. Time for you and your friends to leave." But Devin was just getting started, his eyes locked on Maya with the intensity of someone who'd been waiting for this moment, who'd rehearsed these words in the dark corners of his mind. You know what's funny, Maya? Everyone's walking around pretending your daddy was some kind of saint, some upstanding citizen. But I know the truth. I know what really happened that night. Devin, Marcus's voice hardened, his hand moving to his cuffs. I'm not going to tell you again. Leave now. That's when Maya made her mistake. Or perhaps it wasn't a mistake at all, but rather the breaking point of a girl who'd carried too much pain for too long. She vaulted over the counter with surprising agility, her small frame propelled by rage and grief, and she went straight for Devin with her fists clenched and tears streaming down her face. You don't say his name, she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. You don't get to talk about him. Marcus reacted on instinct, his training overriding his judgment in that crucial split second. He intercepted Maya mid-stride, his arms wrapping around her to pull her back, to prevent the violence that he could see coming like a freight train barreling down the tracks. But Maya was thrashing, fighting against his grip with the desperate strength of the traumatized, her elbow catching him in the ribs, her feet kicking backward. Maya, stop. Calm down. Marcus's voice was urgent but controlled, even as pain radiated from where her elbow had connected. He tried to restrain her without hurting her, tried to de-escalate a situation that was spiraling into chaos. But then Maya twisted in his grip and spat in his face, a desperate, rage-filled gesture of defiance that cut through Marcus's carefully maintained composure like a knife through butter. And in that moment, with spittle running down his cheek, with the laughter of Devin and his friends echoing through the store, with the eyes of every customer boring into him, with the ghost of Robert Johnson's murder hanging over everything like a suffocating blanket, Marcus Bennett did something he would regret for the rest of his life. His hand came up and connected with Maya's face in a sharp, echoing slap that seemed to freeze time itself. The sound was like a gunshot in the confined space of the store, a sharp crack that made everyone gasp, that made Devin's laughter die in his throat, that made the old man with the lottery tickets drop his purchases on the floor. Maya stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek, blood beginning to trickle from her split lip, where Marcus's wedding ring had caught the delicate skin. For 3 heartbeats nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then the phones came out. 7 different smartphones, held by 7 different witnesses, all capturing the same moment from slightly different angles. A uniformed police officer standing over a 15-year-old black girl who was bleeding, his face a mixture of shock and horror at what he'd just done, while the girl looked up at him with eyes that held not fear, but something far more complicated. A mixture of betrayal, rage, and a grief so profound it seemed to swallow all the light in the room. Marcus's voice, when he finally found it, sounded hollow and distant to his own ears. Maya, But Maya was already backing away, her hand still pressed to her bleeding lip, her eyes never leaving his face. Don't, she whispered. And the single word carried more weight than any accusation could have. Just don't. The store erupted into chaos. Customers were shouting, some demanding Marcus's badge number, others trying to help Maya, still others streaming toward the exits as if fleeing a crime scene. Devin and his friends had vanished like smoke, leaving behind only the wreckage of their accusations. And Marcus stood frozen in the center of it all, his hands still tingling from the impact, his career flashing before his eyes, his carefully built reputation crumbling like a sandcastle before the tide. By the time backup arrived, Officers Chen and Rodriguez responding to multiple 911 calls, the first video had already been uploaded to Twitter. By the time Marcus was escorted from the store and placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation, it had 3,000 views. By the time he pulled into his driveway and sat in his patrol car with his hands shaking and his badge feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds, it had gone viral. Marcus Bennett sat in his darkened living room at 1:37 a.m., unable to sleep, unable to think, unable to process what his life had become in the span of 4 hours. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing, reporters requesting comment, fellow officers checking in, friends who'd seen the video and didn't know what to say. His wife Jennifer had tried to talk to him, but what could she say? What could anyone say? He pulled up the video on his phone for the 100th time, forcing himself to watch, to see what millions of strangers were seeing. The angle was clear, unambiguous, a cop striking a teenager. The context was lost, the build-up invisible, the complexity reduced to a single damning moment captured in high definition and shared with righteous fury across every social media platform. The comments were what you'd expect, calls for his firing, his arrest, his death, comparisons to every high-profile case of police brutality from the past decade, doxing attempts that had already uncovered his home address, his wife's workplace, his daughter's school. The machinery of viral outrage had seized upon him with the relentlessness of a python squeezing tighter with each passing hour. But it was the other comments that haunted him most, the ones from people in the community who knew him, who'd seen him at neighborhood barbecues and school fundraisers, who'd watched him help old Mrs. Patterson carry her groceries or play basketball with kids at the park. The disappointment in those comments hurt more than all the death threats combined. "I trusted you, Officer Bennett, we all did. How could you? You were one of the good ones, or so we thought." Marcus closed his eyes, but he could still see Maya's face, not angry, not afraid, but heartbroken, as if he'd betrayed something precious and irreplaceable, as if he'd confirmed every awful thing she'd ever thought about cops, about authority, about the world that had taken her father from her. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from his captain. "Don't talk to anyone, lawyer up. IA interview Monday 9 a.m. I'm sorry, Marcus." Sorry, as if sorry could fix this. As if sorry could undo 4 seconds of lost control that had destroyed everything he'd built over 12 years of service. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't know as he sat alone in the dark, his career in ruins, his reputation destroyed, was that Maya Johnson was sitting in her own darkness across town, her lips stitched and bandaged, staring at her father's old journal that she'd found hidden in the basement of the store. A journal filled with names, dates, and accusations that, if true, meant Robert Johnson's murder was anything but a random robbery. A journal that mentioned Marcus Bennett's name a dozen times, always in the context of the only one I might be able to trust. And in the margins of the last entry, dated the day before her father died, Robert Johnson had written in his careful hand, "If anything happens to me, give this to Bennett. He's the only cop in Oakland who might actually care about the truth." Maya traced her father's handwriting with trembling fingers, her split lip throbbing with every heartbeat, her mind spinning with impossible questions. The cop who just slapped her, who just humiliated her in front of the entire world, was the same cop her father had trusted with his life. It made no sense. Nothing made sense anymore. But as she read deeper into her father's journal, as the pieces of a conspiracy began to fit together like some horrifying jigsaw puzzle, Maya realized that the slap was the least of her worries. Her father had uncovered something big, something that had gotten him killed. And if the journal was right, then the people who'd killed him were still out there, still in power, still pulling strings from the shadows. And they would kill again, to keep their secrets buried. Outside Maya's window, a black sedan with tinted windows sat idling at the corner, its occupants watching the darkened store with predatory patience. Inside the car, a voice spoke into a radio. "The girl has the journal. Repeat, the Johnson girl has the journal. Do we move on her?" The response crackled back through static. "Not yet. Wait and watch. See what she does with it. If she goes to the media or the cops, we'll have to accelerate the timeline. But if she's smart, maybe this all goes away on its own. And if she's not smart?" A pause heavy with implication. "Then we handle it the same way we handled her father, permanently." The sedan's engine purred softly in the Oakland night, a predator's growl barely audible above the city's ambient noise. And in separate locations across the city, a disgraced cop and a traumatized teenager both sat awake in the darkness, neither knowing that their lives were about to become even more entangled, that the slap was just the beginning of a story that would expose rot at the heart of Oakland's power structure and force both of them to choose between safety and truth, between silence and justice, between who they were and who they needed to become. The video kept spreading, the outrage kept building, and the real story, the one that would make the viral moment seem like nothing more than a distraction, was just beginning to unfold. The Oakland Police Department's Internal Affairs Bureau occupied the third floor of a concrete building that looked more like a prison than a place of justice, which, Marcus reflected as he sat in the gray-walled interview room at precisely 9:00 a.m. on Monday morning, was perhaps fitting. His union-appointed lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Reeves, who defended cops through 3 decades of controversies, sat beside him with a legal pad covered in notes, and an expression that suggested she'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. Across the table, Internal Affairs investigators Lieutenant Sarah Morrison and Detective Frank Chu arranged their files with the methodical precision of people who'd conducted hundreds of these interviews. The video of the slap played on a laptop between them, paused at the exact moment of impact. Marcus's hand frozen mid-strike, Maya's face captured in that split second before pain and betrayal registered in her eyes. "Officer Bennett," Lieutenant Morrison began, her voice professionally neutral in the way that people practiced when they wanted to seem unbiased but had already reached their conclusions. "You've reviewed the footage. You've read the witness statements. 6 civilians, 4 of whom don't know you personally, all corroborate that you struck a minor without immediate provocation or threat to your safety. Do you dispute these facts? Marcus's jaw tightened. Patricia's hand on his arm was a gentle reminder to let her do the talking, but he couldn't stay silent. I don't dispute what the video shows, but the video doesn't show everything. It doesn't show her attacking a civilian. It doesn't show her assaulting me. It doesn't show. It shows, Detective Chu interrupted, his voice hard. A decorated police officer losing control and striking a 15-year-old girl hard enough to split her lip and require 3 stitches. It shows exactly what the department has spent millions of dollars in training teaching you not to do. It shows. Gentlemen, Patricia cut in smoothly, my client acknowledges that the optics are bad, but let's not pretend this is occurring in a vacuum. Officer Bennett has 12 years of exemplary service, 0 excessive force complaints, and was responding to a legitimate disturbance call when a subject, regardless of age, became physically violent toward both civilians and the responding officer. The use of force continuum allows. The use of force continuum, Morrison said coldly, does not allow for an open-hand strike to the face of a restrained minor who weighs 90 pounds soaking wet. You know that, Ms. Reeves. Officer Bennett knows that. Which is why we're here having this conversation, instead of Officer Bennett being on patrol where he belongs. The interview continued for another 90 minutes, covering every second of that night in excruciating detail. Marcus answered honestly, painfully aware that honesty wouldn't save him, that in the court of public opinion he'd already been tried and convicted. When they finally released him with the standard admonishment not to contact witnesses or discuss the investigation, Marcus felt like he'd aged a decade in the span of a morning. He was walking to his car, head down, when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Officer Bennett, we need to talk, about my father, about what really happened to him, and about why you might be in danger too. Maya Johnson. Marcus stared at the message for a full minute, his thumb hovering over the delete button. Every instinct, every ounce of training, every word his lawyer had just spoken told him to ignore it, to let IA do their investigation, to stay as far away from Maya Johnson as humanly possible. Contact with her would be seen as witness tampering. It could cost him not just his career but his freedom. But there was something in the message, the mention of her father, the suggestion of danger, that hooked into Marcus's cop instincts like a fishhook finding flesh. Robert Johnson's murder had never sat right with him, though he'd been warned off the case by supervisors who insisted it was being handled by homicide and wasn't his concern. The official story was a robbery gone wrong. Robert surprised by armed intruders, shot twice in the chest, the store's safe emptied of approximately $3,000. Case closed, except it wasn't closed at all, just filed away in the growing mountain of unsolved murders that plagued Oakland like an epidemic. Marcus typed back, "This isn't a good idea, I can't meet with you." The response came immediately. "Then I'll take what I found to the media, but I thought you might want to see it first, since my dad seemed to think you were the only honest cop in Oakland. Guess he was wrong about that too." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the trap closing around him. If Maya went to the media with information about her father's death while Marcus was under investigation for slapping her, the narrative would be perfect. Cop who killed informant's friend now trying to silence the daughter. It didn't matter if it was true. Truth had stopped mattering the moment that video went viral. But if he met with her and IA found out, his career was over regardless of what the investigation concluded. Damned if he did, destroyed if he didn't. He texted back, "Where?" 3 hours later, Marcus sat in his personal vehicle, a decade-old Honda Civic that Jennifer kept threatening to replace, in the parking lot of Lake Merritt, watching joggers and families enjoying the unseasonably cool afternoon. He told his wife he needed to clear his head, which wasn't entirely a lie. His head needed clearing more than it had in his entire life. Maya appeared at exactly 3:00 p.m., walking with the cautious gait of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. She was wearing a hoodie despite the heat, and Marcus noticed she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with passers-by. The bandage on her lip was smaller now but still visible, an accusation written in gauze and medical tape. She slid into the passenger seat without preamble, clutching a worn leather journal to her chest like it was a life preserver. Up close, Marcus could see the dark circles under her eyes, the exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. She looked like someone who hadn't slept since Friday night, which probably meant she looked exactly like he did. "You shouldn't have come," Maya said, her voice flat and emotionless. "This is stupid for both of us." "Then why did you ask me here?" "Because," Maya said, finally meeting his eyes, "my father wrote about you. A lot. And I need to know if you're the person he thought you were or if he was wrong about everything." She opened the journal, and Marcus saw pages covered in Robert Johnson's handwriting. He recognized it from the dozens of times Robert had filed complaints about neighborhood issues, always carefully documented, always respectfully worded. But these pages were different. Names, dates, dollar amounts, allegations of corruption that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Your father was documenting police corruption?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just documenting," Maya said. "He was going to testify. He'd agreed to cooperate with some federal investigation. FBI, I think, though he never wrote that down explicitly. He talked about the feds like they were his ticket out of the nightmare he'd stumbled into." Marcus scanned the pages, seeing names he recognized. Officers he worked with, supervisors he reported to, even a deputy chief who'd been at the department for 20 years. The allegations ranged from taking bribes from drug dealers to evidence tampering to outright theft during raids. It was comprehensive, damning, and if even half of it was true, it explained why Robert Johnson had ended up dead. "Maya, this is witness to a federal investigation. You can't just be carrying this around. You need to turn this over to..." "To who?" Maya's voice cracked with bitter laughter. "The cops my dad says are corrupt. The FBI agents who were supposed to protect him and let him get killed anyway. The media who will turn it into a circus and get me killed before anyone can verify anything." She had a point, and Marcus hated that she had a point. "Why show me?" he asked. "After Friday night, why would you trust me with anything?" Maya was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the lake where children were feeding ducks and couples were walking hand in hand, living lives untouched by corruption and violence and the weight of dead father's secrets. "Because," she said finally, "on the last page, the last thing my dad wrote before he died, he said if anything happened to him, I should find you. He said you were different. He said you actually gave a damn about the neighborhood instead of just collecting a paycheck. He said..." Her voice broke, and for the first time Marcus saw the girl beneath the armor, the traumatized, grieving daughter who just wanted her father back. "He said you were the only cop he'd met in 10 years who reminded him of why he used to respect police when he was a kid." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he'd built to protect himself from the guilt and shame of Friday night. "Maya, I'm sorry for what happened at the store. I lost control and there's no excuse for that. None." "I know," Maya said softly. "I've watched the video about 100 times. I've seen what I did too, the spitting, the fighting. I was out of control. We both were. But that doesn't change the fact that you're an adult with training and a gun and a badge, and I'm a kid who I just miss my dad so much it makes me crazy sometimes." They sat in silence, two people who'd become viral symbols of systemic problems they hadn't created and couldn't solve, bonded by violence and now by the ghost of a man who tried to do the right thing and paid with his life. "There's more," Maya said, flipping to a specific page. "My dad documented a raid that went wrong 3 years ago, a house on 52nd Street. The official report said they found cocaine and arrested 2 dealers, but my dad talked to the family afterward. They said the cops planted the drugs, stole $20,000 in cash from a safe, and beat the father so badly he ended up in the hospital." Marcus remembered that raid. He'd been on patrol that night but hadn't been part of the entry team. The lead officer had been Detective Raymond Cole, a 20-year veteran with a reputation for getting results and not asking too many questions about methodology. "The family never filed a complaint," Marcus said, "because Detective Cole threatened them. Said if they made noise, their kids would end up in foster care and they'd end up in prison on trafficking charges. My dad heard about it through neighborhood connections, started digging, found out it wasn't the first time Cole's team had done something like that. And your father was going to testify about this." Maya nodded. "About that and about 8 other incidents going back 5 years. He had witnesses, documentation, everything the FBI said they needed to build a RICO case against a criminal conspiracy operating inside the Oakland PD. RICO, racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations. The kind of charge that took down mob families and drug cartels. The kind of charge that, if applied to corrupt cops, would shake the department to its foundations and destroy careers all the way up the chain of command. Maya, if this is real, if your father really had this much evidence, then the people he was investigating are the same people who killed him," Maya finished. "I know. I've known since I found the journal. That's why I've been terrified for the last 3 days. That's why I reached out to you. Because I don't know what to do with this, but I know I can't just ignore it. My dad died trying to clean up this city. I can't let that be for nothing." Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. each one more dangerous than the last. If Maya went public with the journal, she'd become a target, assuming she wasn't already one. If she turned it over to the FBI, there was no guarantee they could protect her better than they'd protected her father. If she did nothing, corrupt cops would continue to victimize the community and her father's sacrifice would be meaningless. And then there was the personal calculation. If Marcus helped her, he'd be violating direct orders, potentially destroying what little remained of his career, and putting himself in the crosshairs of cops who'd already proven they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. But if he didn't help her, a 15-year-old girl would be left alone to fight a battle against enemies who wore badges and carried guns, and had the entire weight of institutional power behind them. "There's something else," Maya said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Since Friday night, I've noticed a black sedan following me, different times, always keeping distance but always there. This morning I saw it parked outside the store when I opened up. They're watching me." Ice formed in Marcus's gut. "Did you get the license plate?" "It's got dealer plates, temporary registration, impossible to trace without department resources." Which meant whoever was watching Maya had access to the kind of resources that could get untraceable vehicles. Resources like a police evidence locker full of cars seized in drug raids. "Maya, you need to stop staying at the store. You need to go somewhere safe, somewhere they can't." "Can't what? Can't kill me like they killed my dad." Maya's laugh was hollow and terrifying from someone so young. "There is no safe, Officer Bennett. Not for me. Not anymore. The only safety is in exposure, getting this journal to people who can do something with it before they silence me permanently." Marcus made a decision then, the kind of decision that would define the rest of his life. "Call me Marcus, and let me make some calls. I know someone who might be able to help." "FBI. Better, a reporter. Someone who's spent 20 years investigating police corruption, and has the kind of platform that makes it impossible to just disappear stories. If we give this to her with enough evidence to verify, she can run it in a way that protects you while still exposing everything. And what about you? You help me with this, your career is over." Marcus looked at the journal, at the names of cops he'd worked alongside for years, at the evidence of corruption that had rotted the department from the inside while he'd gone about his patrols, and told himself he was one of the good guys. He thought about Robert Johnson, a decent man trying to run a store and raise a daughter, murdered for trying to do the right thing. He thought about all the times he'd heard whispers, seen things that didn't quite add up, felt that instinctive cop knowledge that something was wrong but looked away, because confronting it seemed too hard, too dangerous, too likely to mark him as a traitor to the blue wall of silence. "My career was over the moment I slapped you," Marcus said quietly. "At least this way it means something." What neither of them saw was the sedan pulling into the parking lot 3 rows behind them, or the telephoto lens capturing their meeting, or the encrypted phone call being made to a number that led to an office in the Oakland Police Department's downtown headquarters. What neither of them knew was that the clock was already counting down to a confrontation that would force both of them to choose between survival and justice, between running and fighting, between the people they'd been and the people they needed to become. But they would learn soon enough. The ghosts of the past were coming for them both, and this time there would be no looking away. Jessica Chen had been an investigative journalist for the San Francisco Chronicle for 23 years, and in that time she'd broken stories that had toppled city councils, exposed corporate fraud, and sent more than a dozen corrupt officials to prison. She had the kind of reputation that made powerful people nervous and sources trust her with their lives. Which is exactly why Marcus called her from a burner phone while sitting in a diner 30 miles outside Oakland, with Maya across from him and the journal between them like a loaded weapon. "You're asking me to believe that there's an organized corruption ring operating inside the Oakland PD, that they murdered a civilian witness, and that the only evidence is a journal written by a dead man and the testimony of his traumatized teenage daughter." Jessica's voice on the phone was skeptical but not dismissive, the tone of someone who'd heard 1,000 conspiracy theories, but knew that sometimes the conspiracies turned out to be real. "I'm asking you to look at the evidence," Marcus said. "Cross-reference the dates and incidents in the journal with official police reports. Interview the families Robert Johnson identified. Pull public records on property purchases and financial statements for the officers he named. If it's not real, you'll know within a week. But if it is real..." "If it's real, it's the biggest police corruption story in California in a decade," Jessica finished. "Which also makes it the most dangerous. Marcus, you know what you're risking here. Your career, your pension, possibly your freedom if the department decides to make an example of you." "I know, do it anyway." There was a long pause on the line. And the girl, Maya Johnson, she's willing to go on record. Marcus looked across the table at Maya, who nodded with a determination that seemed far too heavy for her young shoulders to carry. She's willing, Marcus confirmed, but she needs protection, real protection, not the kind that failed her father. I can work with the FBI's media protection protocols. If the evidence is as solid as you say, they'll want her alive to testify. Send me photographs of every page in that journal. Use a secure server, I'll text you the link. And Marcus, watch your back. If half of what you're suggesting is true, you just became a target the moment you decided to help her. The call ended, and Marcus and Maya sat in the relative safety of a truck stop diner, surrounded by people who had no idea that the cop and the teenager sharing fries in the corner booth were sitting on information that could shatter a police department and redraw the power structures of an entire city. For the next 6 hours, they photographed every page of Robert Johnson's journal using Maya's phone and Marcus's, uploading them to Jessica's secure server with the kind of paranoid caution that felt silly, until you remembered that people had died to keep these secrets buried. Maya narrated as they worked, filling in context that her father's careful handwriting couldn't convey, the fear in his voice when he talked about the investigation, the way he'd started looking over his shoulder constantly in the weeks before his death, the FBI agent who'd visited the store 3 times and promised protection that never materialized. He told me he was doing this for me, Maya said softly as they photographed the final pages. Said he wanted me to grow up in a city where cops were heroes instead of just another gang in uniforms. He actually believed that was possible. Maybe it is, Marcus said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Maybe that's what we're fighting for. But even as they worked, even as they built their case with the methodical precision of people who knew they'd only get one shot at this, the walls were closing in around them in ways they couldn't see and couldn't prepare for. 300 miles away, in a secure conference room at FBI headquarters in San Francisco, Special Agent Lisa Torres was reviewing surveillance reports on the Oakland PD corruption investigation, codenamed Operation Clean House, that had been running for 18 months. Robert Johnson had been her star witness, the civilian informant who'd accidentally stumbled into evidence of systemic corruption and agreed to cooperate in exchange for witness protection for himself and his daughter. She'd failed him. The thought kept Torres awake at nights, kept her reviewing the case files obsessively, kept her searching for how it had gone wrong. They'd had Robert in protective custody, had moved him to a safe house, had been planning the grand jury testimony that would bring down everyone from beat cops to deputy chiefs. And then, somehow, the corrupt cops had found him. A sophisticated hit made to look like a robbery, Robert dead before he could testify. The investigation stalled without its key witness. Now Torres stared at a new surveillance photo that had landed on her desk from an Oakland field agent. Officer Marcus Bennett and Maya Johnson sitting together in Bennett's car at Lake Merritt, the journal clearly visible between them. The daughter has the evidence, Torres said to her partner, Special Agent James Kowalski, a veteran of public corruption cases who'd seen every variation of dirty cops trying to cover their tracks. And she's recruited Bennett to help her. Bennett's the one from the viral video, right? The cop who slapped her. The same, which makes this either incredibly stupid or incredibly desperate on the girl's part. Bennett's under IA investigation, his career is over. He has every reason to try to salvage his reputation by becoming a hero in a corruption case. Or, Kowalski suggested, he's exactly what Robert Johnson thought he was, a straight cop in a dirty department who might actually help the girl instead of silencing her like the others did to her father. Torres pulled up Marcus Bennett's service record on her screen. 12 years, 0 excessive force complaints, multiple community commendations, decorated for his work in community policing. His performance reviews read like a textbook example of what cops were supposed to be. His file is too clean, Torres said. Nobody works in Oakland for 12 years without at least one complaint, one use of force incident beyond what we saw Friday. Unless he was deliberately staying clean because he knew something was wrong and wanted to be above suspicion when the time came to act, Kowalski finished. Or unless he's the perfect plant, staying clean so he'd be trusted when the time came to protect the corruption. We need to bring them both in, Torres decided. Tonight, before whatever they're planning goes forward. If the girl has Robert's documentation, it could be enough to restart the grand jury proceedings, but only if she's alive to testify and Bennett hasn't already compromised the evidence. But even as Torres was making plans to secure Maya and Marcus, another group was making very different plans. Detective Raymond Cole sat in an unmarked surveillance van 2 blocks from the diner where Marcus and Maya had just finished photographing the journal. He'd been following Bennett since the IA interview, had observed the meeting with the Johnson girl, had tracked them to this remote location, where they clearly thought they were safe. The telephoto footage was clear enough to show the journal, to show the intense conversation, to show 2 people who decided to become a problem that needed to be eliminated. Cole's phone rang, the encrypted burner he used for the kind of conversations that could never appear on official records. "Tell me you have a solution," said the voice on the other end. Deputy Chief Martin Brennan, 25 years on the force, 5 years from retirement, and deeply implicated in every page of Robert Johnson's journal. "They're together, isolated 30 miles from Oakland in a location with no security cameras," Cole reported. "We could make it look like a murder-suicide. Disgraced cop and traumatized girl, both suicidal, both with nothing left to lose. Tragic but believable." "What about the journal?" "We retrieve it from the scene. Say it was Bennett's insurance policy, his documentation of Maya's false allegations against the department. It becomes evidence of how far she was willing to go to frame good cops because of her father's death." There was a long pause on the line. Then, "Do it. But Cole, no mistakes this time. This needs to be clean, permanent, and most importantly, it needs to end the threat. We've already lost control of the narrative once with that damn video. We can't afford another viral moment." "Understood. I'll need 2 hours to set it up properly." "You have 1. Every minute they're out there is another chance they pass that journal to someone who can use it. End this tonight." The call disconnected, and Cole gestured to the 3 other officers in the van, all of them dirty, all of them compromised, all of them with too much to lose if Robert Johnson's allegations ever saw the light of day. They checked their weapons, reviewed the plan, and prepared to commit murder in the name of self-preservation. But what none of them knew was that Jessica Chen was already moving. The journalist had received the uploaded journal images and immediately recognized what she was holding: a Pulitzer Prize-winning story and a death warrant for anyone associated with it. She'd contacted her FBI sources within minutes, triggering a response protocol that had Special Agent Torres scrambling a tactical team to the diner's location, with orders to secure Maya Johnson and Marcus Bennett before anyone could silence them permanently. And what Detective Cole didn't know was that Marcus Bennett, despite being suspended, still had cop instincts that had kept him alive through a dozen years of dangerous policing. He'd noticed the surveillance van, had clocked the body language of the men inside it, had recognized the predatory patience of people waiting for the right moment to strike. "We need to move," Marcus said suddenly, his hand already reaching for his car keys. "Now." "What? Why?" Maya looked confused, still in the mindset of someone who thought they were safe. "Because," Marcus said, his eyes locked on the van in the parking lot where 4 men were exiting with purposeful strides and concealed weapons. "We're about to have company, and I don't think they're here to help." The men were crossing the parking lot now, their hands positioned near their weapons, their movements coordinated in the way that spoke of training and tactical planning. Marcus recognized Cole even at a distance, the distinctive walk, the aggressive posture of a cop who'd never learned the difference between enforcement and brutality. "Go out the back," Marcus told Maya urgently. "Through the kitchen. Don't stop, don't look back. There's a gas station 2 blocks east. Get there, go inside, and don't leave until the FBI arrives." "The FBI, how do you know?" "Because I called them too. Because Jessica Chen called them. Because your father's journal is now in the hands of people who can actually protect you. But none of that matters if we don't survive the next 5 minutes." Cole and his team were at the diner's entrance now. Marcus could see their hands moving to their weapons, could see the determination in their eyes, the look of men who decided that murder was preferable to prison. "Maya, go now." And then several things happened at once. Maya bolted for the kitchen, her young legs carrying her faster than Marcus could have managed, the journal clutched to her chest like a lifeline. Cole and his team burst through the diner's front door, weapons drawn, badges displayed. Because of course they'd make it look official, make it look like they were there to arrest a dangerous suspect who'd forced them to use lethal force. Customers screamed, dove under tables, the kind of chaos that would make witness statements unreliable and investigation difficult. And Marcus Bennett, 12-year veteran of the Oakland Police Department, suspended officer under investigation for excessive force, made a choice that would define everything that came after. He stood up, placed himself between Cole's team and the kitchen door through which Maya had vanished, and raised his hands in a gesture of surrender that he knew wouldn't be honored. Raymond, Marcus said calmly, his voice cutting through the chaos, you don't want to do this. Not here, not with this many witnesses. Cole's gun was pointed at Marcus's chest, but his eyes were calculating, weighing options, running through scenarios. You're under arrest for interfering with a federal investigation and witness tampering. Drop to your knees, hands behind your head. I'm already suspended, Raymond. I'm not interfering with anything. And we both know you're not here to arrest anyone. You're here to clean up a mess. But the mess is already bigger than you can contain. The journal's been uploaded. The FBI has copies. Killing me and the girl just makes you look guilty. He's bluffing, one of Cole's team members said, Officer Mike Torres, a 15-year veteran with a reputation for violence and a jacket full of excessive force complaints that had mysteriously disappeared from his file. The girl has the journal. We grab her, we grab it, we end this. But Cole was hesitating, his cop instincts warring with his criminal ones, because Marcus was right. Too many witnesses, too much exposure. Too many ways this could go wrong and make everything worse. That's when the FBI tactical team hit the front and back entrances simultaneously. Their coordinated breach so fast and professional that Cole's team barely had time to register what was happening before they were surrounded by agents in tactical gear with automatic weapons, and the kind of overwhelming force that made resistance suicidal. FBI, drop your weapons, get on the ground. The commands came from every direction at once, delivered with the kind of authority that couldn't be ignored or defied. Cole's team complied because they had no choice, their guns clattering to the floor, their bodies going prone in the practice positions of people who'd made countless arrests and now found themselves on the receiving end. Special Agent Torres swept into the diner like an avenging angel, her eyes finding Marcus first, then tracking to the kitchen where Maya was being escorted out by agents who'd secured her through the back exit. Officer Bennett, Torres said, her voice professional but not unkind, you've had quite an evening. Agent Torres, I presume. Marcus's hands were still raised, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The same. Thank you for keeping Miss Johnson alive long enough for us to get here. Jessica Chen sends her regards, by the way. She's already preparing to run the story, with or without your cooperation, though she'd prefer with. Torres turned to Cole and his team, now being cuffed by FBI agents while diner customers recorded everything on their phones. Another viral moment in the making, but this time with very different implications. Detective Cole, you and your associates are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and violations of the RICO Act. You have the right to remain silent. As Torres read them their rights, Marcus made his way to Maya, who stood pale and shaking but alive, the journal still clutched in her hands. Is it over? She asked, her voice small and young in a way it hadn't been since the slap, as if the adrenaline crash had stripped away the hard armor she'd built around her grief. No, Marcus said honestly, this is just the beginning. There's going to be trials, testimony, media scrutiny. Your life is going to be chaos for a while, but at least you'll be alive for it. At least your father's death will mean something. Maya looked at the journal, at her father's careful handwriting documenting corruption and courage in equal measure. He would have liked you, I think. The real you, not the guy who slapped me. I'm sorry, Marcus said, and this time the apology felt like it might actually mean something. For what it's worth, I'm so damn sorry. I know, Maya said, and then surprising both of them she hugged him, a quick, fierce embrace that spoke of shared trauma and unexpected alliance. Thank you for not giving up on me, on this, on doing the right thing even when it cost you everything. But as the FBI agents led Cole and his team away, as the diner emptied of traumatized customers who would spend weeks giving statements and testifying to grand juries, as Jessica Chen's story began to upload to the Chronicle's servers with a headline that would dominate the news cycle for months, Marcus and Maya both understood that the hardest part was still ahead. Because exposing corruption was one thing, living with the consequences was something else entirely. And the forces they challenged, the institutional power, the blue wall of silence, the machinery of systemic injustice, didn't disappear just because some corrupt cops got arrested. They adapted. They protected themselves. They found new ways to maintain control. The battle had been won. But the war was just beginning. The Oakland Federal Courthouse was built like a fortress, all concrete and steel and security checkpoints designed to withstand everything from terrorist attacks to angry mobs. On the morning of October 12th, 58 days after the viral slap, 43 days after the arrests of Detective Cole and his team, and 27 days into the grand jury proceedings that would reshape Oakland's police department, it needed every bit of that security. Outside, protesters lined the streets in rival camps. On one side, community activists and families of police brutality victims holding signs demanding justice and accountability. On the other, police union members and thin blue line supporters insisting that good cops were being persecuted for doing their jobs in impossible circumstances. The media circus was 3 rings deep, with national news crews capturing every moment of a story that had transcended local corruption and become a referendum on policing in America. Inside, in a secure witness preparation room, Maya Johnson sat across from Jessica Chen and Special Agent Tours, reviewing her testimony for the 100th time. Maya transformed in the nearly 2 months since that night at the diner. Her hair was cut shorter, her clothes more formal, her bearing less like a traumatized teenager, and more like someone who'd learned that survival required steel wrapped around the grief. But her eyes still carried shadows that spoke of nightmares and security details, and the weight of being the face of a movement she'd never asked to lead. "The defense is going to try to discredit your father," Tours reminded her gently. "They're going to paint him as an informant with an axe to grind, someone who fabricated evidence to settle personal scores or get a deal for his own legal problems." "My dad never committed a crime in his life," Maya said, her voice steady despite the anger burning beneath it. "He ran a store, he paid his taxes, he helped neighbors who couldn't afford groceries. The only legal problem he had was knowing too much about cops who turned their badges into weapons." "I know that," Tours said. "You know that. But juries need to be convinced, and the defense attorneys representing Cole and the others are the best money can buy. Money that's coming from the police union and from people with a vested interest in making sure this prosecution fails." Jessica Chen, who'd been nominated for a Pulitzer for her Chronicle exposé and was now writing a book about the case, leaned forward. "Maya, how are you holding up, really?" Maya considered the question. How was she holding up? She was living in a safe house, couldn't attend her own high school without FBI protection, received death threats so regularly that they'd stopped shocking her, and carried the weight of her father's legacy on shoulders that some days felt too narrow and weak to bear it. The store, her father's dream, had been firebombed by unknown assailants 2 weeks after Cole's arrest, forcing her to close it permanently and sell the property at a loss. Her mother, who'd left when Maya was 6, had suddenly reappeared with media interviews and talk show appearances, monetizing grief she'd never actually experienced. "I'm surviving," Maya said finally, "which is more than my dad got to do, so I'll take it." In another room down the hall, Marcus Bennett sat with his own lawyer, not the union-appointed attorney anymore, but a civil rights lawyer named David Washington, who'd taken his case pro bono after the full story emerged. Marcus had been cleared by internal affairs, reinstated to the force, and then immediately resigned in a press conference that had gone nearly as viral as the original slap video. His statement had been brief and devastating. "I can't in good conscience wear a badge that's been tarnished by officers who betrayed everything it's supposed to represent. I hope someday Oakland PD earns back the trust of the community it's sworn to serve. But I can't be part of that institution until fundamental changes are made." The resignation had made him a hero to some, a traitor to others. His fellow officers were split, some quietly supportive, others openly hostile, all of them dealing with the fallout of having their department exposed as harboring a criminal conspiracy that had operated with impunity for years. "The grand jury is going to indict," Washington told Marcus. "Tours says they have 19 officers they're charging with everything from bribery to racketeering to first-degree murder in Robert Johnson's death. This is going to be the biggest police corruption trial in California history. And my testimony is crucial to establishing the culture of silence that allowed it to happen," Marcus said, reciting what he'd been told countless times. He'd spent weeks with prosecutors, detailing every time he'd heard whispers about Cole's team, every instance where evidence had seemed to disappear or arrests had been made without proper documentation, every moment where he'd felt something was wrong but hadn't pushed hard enough to uncover it. The guilt was crushing, not for what he'd done, but for what he hadn't done. All the times he could have spoken up, could have investigated, could have stopped it before Robert Johnson paid the ultimate price for trying to do what Marcus should have done years ago. "You couldn't have known," Washington said, reading Marcus's expression. "You were one cop in a department of hundreds. The corruption was compartmentalized, hidden, protected by people who'd spent years learning how to avoid detection." "I should have known," Marcus insisted. "I should have pushed harder, asked more questions, been willing to risk my career and my relationships with fellow officers. Instead, I told myself I was doing good work with community policing and that someone else would handle the systemic problems. Robert Johnson is dead because I was a coward. Robert Johnson is dead because corrupt cops killed him, Washington corrected firmly. You don't get to take responsibility for their crimes. What you do get to take responsibility for is what you're doing now, testifying, exposing the truth, trying to make sure it doesn't happen again. The grand jury proceedings took another week. Maya testified for 6 hours over 2 days, walking prosecutors through her father's journal entry by entry, providing context and corroboration for allegations that painted a picture of systemic corruption, so extensive it shocked even seasoned federal prosecutors. Marcus testified for 4 hours, his law enforcement expertise lending credibility to Maya's accounts and providing the insider perspective that made it impossible to dismiss the allegations as civilian misunderstandings or exaggerations. When the indictments came down, they were even more extensive than anticipated. 23 officers charged with crimes ranging from theft to murder. Detective Cole and 6 others faced RICO charges that could put them away for life. Deputy Chief Brennan, who'd overseen the corruption and participated in planning Robert Johnson's murder, faced the death penalty. The city exploded, not in violence but in a reckoning that had been building for decades. Community meetings filled to capacity. The mayor called for police reform. The city council allocated millions for an independent oversight commission. The police union split between reformers and old guard, each faction fighting for the soul of the department. And at the center of it all were an ex-cop and a teenage girl, who'd become the unlikely faces of a movement neither had wanted but both had come to accept as their burden to carry. The trial itself wouldn't begin for another 8 months. Federal cases moved slowly, and the complexity of this one meant delays were inevitable. But the grand jury proceedings had done their job, establishing probable cause, securing indictments, and setting in motion a legal process that would reshape Oakland's police department regardless of the final verdicts. On the night after the indictments were announced, Marcus and Maya met for the first time since the diner, not in a parking lot or a safe house, but in a small community center in West Oakland where organizers were planning the long-term work of police reform. Neither had planned to be there. Both had been invited by activists who understood that symbols mattered, that the cop and the girl who'd gone from viral enemies to unlikely allies represented something powerful about the possibility of change. They sat in the back of the room, watching presentations about community oversight and use of force policies, and the 100 small changes that might add up to systemic transformation. When the meeting ended and people began filtering out, they found themselves alone in the quiet space, 2 people who'd been through trauma together and emerged changed in ways they were still processing. "How's your lip?" Marcus asked, the question absurd given everything that had happened, but somehow the right place to start. Maya touched the small scar unconsciously. "Healed, mostly, still aches when the weather changes, which is weird. Scar tissue does that sometimes." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with unspoken things that needed to be acknowledged. "I keep thinking about that night," Maya said finally. "The slap. Before I found the journal, before everything else, when it was just you and me and that moment of violence that felt like it was going to define both our lives forever. And I wonder, if it hadn't happened, would we be here? Would my dad's journal ever have come to light? Would Cole and his team still be out there, still hurting people, still getting away with it?" "I think about that too," Marcus admitted. "I've run through 1,000 scenarios where I kept my cool, de-escalated properly, didn't lose control. And in most of those scenarios, you never contact me. I never see the journal, and Robert's death stays unsolved while the corruption continues. It's a hell of a thing to carry, the knowledge that my worst moment might have led to the best outcome. That doesn't make it right. What you did was still wrong. I know, and I'll regret it every day for the rest of my life. But you're right that something good came from it. Maybe that's all we can ask for, that our mistakes lead to growth instead of just destruction." Maya pulled out a folded piece of paper from her pocket, smoothed it on her knee. It was a letter, Marcus realized, handwritten in the careful script of someone who'd taken time to get the words exactly right. "I wrote this a month ago," Maya said. "Haven't been able to bring myself to give it to you until now." She handed it to him, and Marcus read. "Officer Bennett, Marcus, I've tried to write this letter a dozen times, and every version sounds wrong because how do you thank someone for helping you seek justice, while also acknowledging they're part of the system that made that justice necessary in the first place? How do you forgive someone for hurting you while recognizing that the hurt was a catalyst for change? My therapist says I don't have to resolve these contradictions, that it's okay to hold multiple truths at once. You were wrong to slap me. You were right to help me. You represent both the problem and the potential solution. You're flawed and heroic, violent and protective, part of the system that killed my father and part of the resistance that's trying to reform it. I don't know if I forgive you. I'm not sure forgiveness is even the right framework. But I'm grateful you chose to be better than your worst moment. I'm grateful you risked everything to help me when you had every reason to protect yourself instead. I'm grateful my father's faith in you was justified, even if it took something terrible to prove it. We're bonded now, whether we like it or not. The cop and the girl from the viral video, the unlikely allies in a fight against corruption. I don't know where this all leads, or if the changes we're fighting for will stick, or if 10 years from now Oakland PD will be reformed or just better at hiding the same old problems. But I know my father would be proud of what we've done, would be proud of what you've done, despite how it started, and that's going to have to be enough. Thank you, Marcus Bennett, for being the cop my father believed you could be, even if it took losing everything for you to become that person. Maya. Marcus's hands trembled as he read, as words he didn't deserve washed over him like absolution he hadn't earned but desperately needed. When he finished, he found he couldn't speak, couldn't process the grace being extended to him by a girl he'd wronged in the worst possible way. You didn't have to write this, he managed finally. I know, but I needed to. For me, not for you, because carrying around rage and pain forever, that's letting Cole and his team win. That's letting my dad's death be nothing but tragedy instead of catalyst. I want to believe that people can change, that systems can change, that America can actually be what it claims to be instead of what it's always been. And I can't believe that if I can't forgive the people who are actually trying to do better. They sat together in the quiet community center, two people who'd become symbols and who carried those symbols like weights around their necks. Outside, the city continued its slow, painful work of reckoning with truths that had been buried for too long. Families of the victims of Cole's team began coming forward, filing lawsuits, demanding accountability. The FBI expanded its investigation to other California police departments, looking for similar patterns of corruption. National media descended on Oakland, turning it into a test case for whether police reform could actually work. And somewhere in the machinery of justice, prosecutors prepared for trials that would determine whether badges and institutional power could truly be held accountable, or whether the system would protect its own the way it always had. Marcus and Maya both knew the odds. They'd studied enough history, seen enough corruption trials end in acquittals or light sentences, watched enough powerful people escape consequences to harbor any illusions about guaranteed outcomes. Justice wasn't assured. Change wasn't certain. The forces they challenged were vast and powerful and experienced in surviving reform movements that burned bright and then faded into cynicism and apathy. But they'd also learned something else in the months since that viral slap. That sometimes the fight itself was the point. That speaking truth to power mattered even when power didn't listen. That standing up for what was right had value beyond the immediate outcomes. That being willing to sacrifice comfort and safety for principle was its own form of victory, regardless of whether the courts and systems agreed. What are you going to do now? Maya asked. After the trials, after all of this is over. Marcus had thought about that question every day since his resignation. I'm thinking about teaching, criminal justice reform, community policing, ethics, trying to train the next generation of cops to be better than we were. What about you? College, Maya said with certainty. Political science, maybe law school after. I want to change systems, not just fight individual battles. My dad showed me that grassroots community work matters, but it's not enough. We need people inside the institutions, people willing to fight from within. She paused, then added with a slight smile, also, I'm 17 now. I can vote in the next election, planning to make it count. They talked for another hour, sharing plans and dreams and the kind of careful hope that people develop when they've seen the worst, but refuse to surrender to cynicism. When they finally parted, it was with a handshake that felt like a peace treaty between former adversaries who'd become something more complicated than friends, but more meaningful than allies. Marcus drove home through Oakland streets that looked the same but felt different. Or maybe he was the one who was different, who saw the city through new eyes that understood how much work remained to be done. Jennifer was waiting up for him, as she'd done every night since the viral video, standing by him through the chaos and the threats and the transformation of their quiet life into a public referendum on policing and accountability. How'd it go? She asked as he dropped his keys on the counter. She wrote me a letter, Maya said. Said she's grateful for what I did to help her, even though she's not sure she forgives me for what started it all. Jennifer pulled him into a hug, her arms around him, the only shelter he'd found in the storm that had become their life. That's more grace than you had any right to expect. I know I don't deserve it. Maybe not, But maybe that's the whole point of grace, that it's not about deserving. It's about choosing to be better than our worst moments and giving others the space to do the same. Miles away in her safe house apartment, Maya sat at her desk with her father's journal open to the last page, reading his final words for the 1000th time. If anything happens to me, give this to Bennett. He's the only cop in Oakland who might actually care about the truth. Her father had been right. In the worst possible way, through the most painful path imaginable, he'd been right. Officer Marcus Bennett had cared about the truth, had sacrificed his career and his safety and his comfortable life to pursue justice for a man he barely knew and a girl he'd wronged. Maya picked up a pen and added her own entry beneath her father's final words. Dad, you were right about Bennett. You were right about a lot of things. I wish you were here to see what your courage started, to see the indictments and the reforms and the possibility of real change. I miss you every single day, but I'm going to keep fighting for the world you wanted me to grow up in. I promise. Your daughter, Maya. P.S. I think Officer Bennett, Marcus, might actually become a decent teacher. He's pretty good at learning from his mistakes. You would have appreciated that about him. She closed the journal, placed it carefully in the fireproof safe the FBI had provided, and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, testimony to review, media interviews to navigate, the endless work of being the face of a movement. But tonight, for the first time since her father's death, Maya Johnson fell asleep without nightmares, carrying the weight of justice sought and the hope of systems that might actually change. The trial would come. The verdicts would be delivered. The reforms would be implemented or watered down or forgotten as other crises captured the public attention. The machinery of power would continue grinding forward, sometimes toward justice and sometimes away from it. But on this night, in this moment, two people who'd been brought together by violence and trauma and viral outrage had found a way forward that honored the dead while fighting for the living. It wasn't redemption. Redemption was too clean, too simple for the messy reality of what had happened. But it was something. A step toward accountability, a glimmer of change, a refusal to let corruption and violence have the final word. And sometimes, in a broken world that seemed designed to crush hope and reward cynicism, that small something was enough to justify the fight. The story that had started with a slap ended with a handshake, not because either gesture erased the other, but because both were true, both mattered, and both pointed toward a future that would be shaped by the choices people made in response to their worst and best moments. Justice remained uncertain, change remained incomplete. But the fight, the difficult, necessary, painful fight for a world where badges meant protection instead of threat, where power served people instead of dominating them, where a 15-year-old girl could grow up without learning to fear the very institutions meant to keep her safe, that fight continued. And as long as it continued, hope remained alive. 6 months later, the verdicts came down on a rainy Tuesday in April. Detective Raymond Cole, guilty on all counts. RICO violations, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice. Sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Deputy Chief Martin Brennan, guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Robert Johnson, conspiracy, racketeering. Sentenced to life without parole, death penalty withdrawn in exchange for testimony against other defendants. 18 additional officers, various convictions ranging from 5 to 20 years. A complete dismantling of the corruption network that had operated inside Oakland PD for more than a decade. The Oakland Police Department entered into a federal consent decree, accepting oversight and reform measures that would reshape every aspect of how the department functioned. The police chief resigned. The union president stepped down. City Council allocated $40 million to community-based public safety alternatives. Maya Johnson testified at every trial, her voice steady, her testimony devastating. She enrolled at Berkeley with a full scholarship, planning to study political science and eventually law. The viral video of the slap had been viewed over 50 million times, but it was now accompanied by context, by the full story of corruption exposed and justice pursued. Marcus Bennett took a teaching position at the police academy, where he taught a new course on ethics and accountability that became required for all recruits. He spoke at community events, wrote op-eds about police reform, and worked with Maya on a foundation they'd created in Robert Johnson's name to support families of police violence victims. The scars remained, physical and emotional, personal and systemic. The work of reform would take years, maybe generations. There would be setbacks and resistance and moments when the progress seemed so incremental as to be meaningless. But something had shifted. A city had looked at itself honestly, seen the rot at the heart of its institutions, and chosen to excise it rather than ignore it. It wasn't complete, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for Maya and Marcus, two people forever bonded by a moment of violence that had catalyzed a movement toward justice, that imperfect reality was enough to keep fighting for, enough to believe that change, difficult, slow, painful change, was actually possible. The viral video would never go away. It would be shown in classrooms and training sessions, analyzed and debated, used as shorthand for everything wrong with policing in America. But now it would also be accompanied by the rest of the story. How a slap became a catalyst, how enemies became allies. How one girl's courage and one cop's choice to be better than his worst moment combined to expose systemic corruption and force a reckoning that might, just might, make the next generation safer than the last. On the anniversary of Robert Johnson's death, Maya and Marcus stood together at his grave, along with dozens of community members who'd come to remember a man who died trying to do the right thing. Maya placed flowers on the headstone, which now bore an additional inscription. His courage exposed corruption. His daughter finished the fight. Marcus stood quietly beside her, no longer a police officer but still someone who believed, despite everything, despite all the evidence to the contrary, that justice was worth fighting for, and that even broken systems could be repaired by people willing to sacrifice comfort for principle. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The entire story was written in the silence between them, in the shared understanding of two people who traveled an impossible journey from that viral moment to this quiet memorial, from enemies to allies to something that transcended both categories. Justice had been served, imperfectly, incompletely, but genuinely. And in a world that often denied such outcomes, that alone was worth celebrating. What would you have done in Maya's shoes? Imagine being just 15 years old, carrying the weight of your murdered father's legacy, holding evidence that could either get you killed or change everything. Imagine making the impossible choice between silence and survival, between protecting yourself and honoring the sacrifice your father made for justice. Would you have had the courage to face down corrupt cops? Would you have trusted a police officer who just humiliated you in front of millions? Would you have risked everything for a truth that might never be heard? This story reminds us that justice can prevail, but only when ordinary people find extraordinary courage. Maya Johnson could have stayed quiet. Marcus Bennett could have protected his career. Both of them had every reason to walk away, to let the corruption continue, to choose safety over truth. But they didn't. And because of their courage, 23 corrupt officers faced justice, a city began real reform, and a system that protected predators with badges was forced to change. If this story made your blood boil with righteous anger at the injustice Maya and her father faced, if it restored even a sliver of your faith that accountability is possible when people refuse to stay silent, if you found yourself cheering when those indictments came down and those corrupt cops finally faced consequences, then I need you to do something right now. Drop a like on this video if you believe corrupt cops should be held accountable just like any other criminal. That simple act tells YouTube to share this story with more people who need to hear it, who need to know that standing up to institutional corruption isn't just possible, it's necessary. Comment below with Justice SERVED if you're tired of watching police brutality videos that end with paid suspensions and no consequences. Let's flood this comment section with voices that demand better from the people who swear to protect and serve. Your comment matters. Your voice adds to a chorus that's getting harder and harder for the powerful to ignore. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell because Maya's story isn't unique, it's one of thousands. Every week, I bring you true stories of ordinary people fighting extraordinary battles against corruption, injustice, and systems designed to silence them. Stories of people who refused to be victims, who fought back, who won against impossible odds. You need to hear these stories. The algorithms need to know people care about justice, not just outrage. Share this video with someone who's lost faith in the system, who thinks one person can't make a difference, who's given up on the possibility of real change. Maya was 15. Marcus was a suspended cop with nothing left to lose. Together, they brought down a criminal conspiracy that had operated with impunity for over a decade. If they can do that, imagine what happens when thousands of us refuse to look away, refuse to stay silent, refuse to accept that this is just how things are. This isn't just entertainment. This is real life. Real families destroyed by corrupt cops. Real communities terrorized by the people who should protect them. Real courage from people like you who decide enough is enough. The system won't change itself. It changes because people like you watch videos like this, get angry about injustice, and refuse to let that anger fade into apathy. It changes because you hit like, you comment, you subscribe, you share. You turn these stories into movements that can't be ignored. So smash that like button right now if you believe Robert Johnson deserved better. Comment Justice SERVED if you're ready to hold corrupt cops accountable. Subscribe if you want to be part of the solution instead of just witnessing the problem. And share this video because somewhere out there, someone needs to know that standing up to corruption isn't suicide. It's how change actually happens. Your engagement isn't just numbers. It's ammunition in the fight against injustice. It's encouragement for the next Maya who's deciding whether to speak up. It's accountability for the next corrupt cop who thinks the badge makes them untouchable. Make your voice heard. Make your anger count. Make justice impossible to ignore. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Do it because you believe, despite everything, despite all the reasons for cynicism, that this broken world can still be repaired by people who refuse to give up on justice.